I am John Natio, the Executive Director of the Institute for Complexity Management, or ICM for short. This is an update on our continuing case involving the Wesleyan Company. A few months ago, we were left heartbroken at the news that our good friend Wes Schneider had passed away. I am extremely proud to have called Wes Schneider a true and good friend. I first spoke with Wes on the telephone in December of 2013. Over the next, for almost a decade, I had the honor of working with a truly great American. Most people would never know the man Wes really was because he was a humble person who worried a lot more about others than he did for himself. But he was, nonetheless, a brave man who did wonderful and heroic things for the rest of us. Now, it has been said that the highest honor a citizen of the United States can receive is the Medal of Freedom, an award bestowed by the President on an individual who has made, and I quote, an especially meritorious contribution to the security or the national interests of the United States. Although I could never do complete justice to the life story of Wes Schneider, I would like to tell you just a little bit about what I personally know about this great man and his accomplishments, so they don't ever get lost in the shuffle of history. I also like to make a call for the country to do the right thing to correct the injustice that the U.S. government did to this great American. Wes was born on May 2, 1953 in Oak Park, Illinois, and raised in Alsip. He was a graduate of Illinois Wesleyan University, and I can personally tell you he was a very smart man. Among his other passions, Wes was an inventor who held many patents on things from special containers to the decoding of distorted images. But Wes invented something else, an invention of great significance to soldiers on today's battlefields. Since the beginning of history, men going into battle have carried drinking water in leather containers, bottles, or canteens. With the emergence of chemical, biological, and nuclear warfare, the dangers of having to open up a container for a soldier to take a simple drink of water became a perilous thing to do. The only answer was to build a brand new type of drinking device where you didn't have to open the container to take a drink. Well, that's exactly what Wes Schneider decided to do, and he did it. In scientific terms, what Wes did was invent a closed-loop human hydration system that had two critical advantages over the regular type of canteens soldiers had been carrying strapped to their hips since before the First World War. First, the new type of drinking system did not have to be opened up to take a drink. And second, soldiers could easily drink on the move by using a straw-like device without contaminating themselves. Now, it just so happened that Wes came up with this new idea at a time when the United States was facing the challenges of chemical warfare on the battlefields of the Middle East during the Iraq War. American and coalition forces were dealing with contaminated dust, abandoned stockpiles of weapons, airborne particles of depleted uranium, burn pits, and the intentional burning of oil wells, all of which served to contaminate the environments in which soldiers must operate. Above all things, Wes was a true patriot. He was, in fact, the recipient of the Senate Republican Senatorial Gold Medal of Freedom, one of the highest honors that members of the U.S. Senate can bestow on an individual. The Medal of Freedom is awarded to a few select individuals who share an inherent belief in the greatness of our country and is presented for dedication, leadership, commitment in support of Republican virtues, principles, and ideals. So what did Wes do? He finished several prototypes of his new on-the-move soldier hydration system and took them to the U.S. Army's Natick laboratories. He showed Natick laboratories how the new system worked and how it could save the lives of soldiers fighting on the battlefields in the Middle East. But while Wes was putting the lives of soldiers first, the U.S. Army brass was not. Instead of moving forward with any sort of dispatch to save the lives and protect the well-being of hundreds of thousands of American troops fighting in the Middle East, Natick Laboratories simply stole Wes's invention. Wes invented his drinking apparatus system in 1980 and presented it to the Army in 1983. Today, it is now standard issue for all U.S. military personnel, and it's used in at least 27 militaries all over the world. It has broad use by runners, bicyclists, and civilian organizations like police, fire, and security forces. The military side alone has generated hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue for its makers. After what he saw going on, Wes went to the Armed Services Board of Contract Appeals. All in all, Wes spent 9 years litigating against the Army and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend his intellectual property by selling cars. He sold a house and taking early pension payouts to pay for legal fees. After 9 years of trying to get justice, the legal part of Wes's battle for justice ended in 2010 with a corrupt DOD internal judicial system called the U.S. Army Board of Contract Appeals. What happened was judicial and lawyer collusion and the outright theft by the government of Wes's invention. Little did Wes realize at the time, but he would spend the rest of his entire life, the next 18 years, trying to find justice. At the same time, the U.S. Army was denying it stole Wes's invention, while they were quietly redirecting the production of Wes's revolutionary hydration system to their own pet contractors as part of what can only be called a war profiteering scheme. A full 2 years were lost before production even began, leaving thousands of soldiers in the battlefields of the Middle East vulnerable to ingesting poisonous toxins. Approximately 200,000 veterans of the 650,000 service members who served in Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm now suffer from what is called Gulf War illness. Unfortunately, we may never know how many of these illnesses and subsequent deaths could have been prevented if the U.S. government had just stopped the fraud and listened to us. That's about the time I got my first telephone call from Wes Schneider. He was a fighter. After talking, we decided the thing to do was to investigate what happened, so that those who placed their own lives and comfort ahead of brave soldiers on the battlefield would be exposed. Our hope was that a little sunshine on the matter might be a cure for the corruption. For over a year, Wes and I worked together as a team to prepare a very detailed investigative report containing overwhelming evidence of the fraud, from thousands of documents to actual eyewitness testimony, right down to tape recordings of people admitting that Wes's invention was in fact stolen by the Army and its contractors. ICM even asked the Inspector General of the Department of Defense to initiate a criminal investigation. ICM reported the results of our investigation to every member of Congress who would talk to us. But absolutely no one, and I mean no one, in the U.S. government cared enough to do anything about it. No one would lift a hand to help fight the egregious injustice being done to Wes and his family. So we were forced to take the matter directly to then Department of Defense Secretary Ashton Carter. Pursuant to the Uniform Commercial Code, or UCC, we confronted Secretary of Defense Carter with a sworn affidavit laying out the facts. Under the U.S. UCC, the Department of Defense was given the opportunity to rebut the facts of our investigation or admit that the U.S. Army brass had stolen Wes's technology. What happened is that Secretary Carter failed to rebut the facts presented in what is called an affirmation of truth, thus admitting that DoD had, in point of legal and binding fact, stolen Wes's invention. During the investigation, I learned the commercial value in just lost license revenues from Wes's invention totaled over $157 million. But amazingly, even though Carter was finally forced to admit the truth, neither Wes nor his family ever saw any recognition of Wes's great accomplishment or a single dime of compensation from the Army or the U.S. government for his contributions saving the lives of American soldiers. I cannot adequately explain to people who have not been through it themselves what the impact was on both Wes and his entire family. Complete disregard, financial ruin, attacks on your character and credibility, and being falsely labeled as a failure are all part of what the U.S. government unfairly and unjustifiably did to Wes Schneider. And even worse, after the U.S. Army brass were incontrovertibly proven to be guilty by their own admission, our own government leaders all failed in their sworn oaths to protect and defend the U.S. Constitution by assuring Wes's unalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness under our Constitution. That's why we are waiting for Congress and our leaders to finally step up to the plate and correct this intolerable injustice by recognizing Wes's contributions to the nation as a patriot and giving his family the compensation they deserve. After all, the American way is to find injustices that are undeservedly and unfairly subjected on people like Wes and his family, and to make them right. To Wes, who is surely looking down on all of us from heaven, I say, we will never forget the legacy of your honesty, care, and the contributions you have left to all of us. Thank you for your service to our country, and God bless you now and forever.